Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, the podcast where we talk to successful bootstrappers about the playbook for bootstrapping. Today, I'm delighted with my co-host Chloe James to welcome Luke Janssen. Luke moved to Sydney, Australia from London in 2002, and in 2005 he founded TigerSpike, an experience in a UX design company. He bootstrapped it for the first 8 years and grew it to over 300 staff, 50 million in revenue, with offices in Tokyo, San Francisco, New York, Dubai, Singapore, Sydney, and Melbourne, before finally fully exiting in 2017. So, welcome, Luke, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts and the lessons you learned in the trenches when you were building and growing TigerSpike.
Cool, thank you. Happy to be here. I was actually just listening to some of Harry Stebbings' podcasts, and it seems to be easy to find podcasts with the real big dogs on it who've done their sort of massive exits. So I thought I would do more so that I could show someone like a medium-sized exit, or I suppose a
Yeah,
small compared to
exactly.
them.
Yeah, that's what we're focused on. People who've done good medium-sized exits rather than just talking to the billionaires, which is obviously great and aspirational. But yeah, we're focused a little bit more grounded on this one here.
If you count Rupiah where I live, I'm definitely already a Rupiah billionaire.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we should say that we're speaking with Luke from lovely Bali. So Bali, London, Adelaide. We're circling the world on this one. Luke, it's
Yeah,
really
you
awesome
guys
to have you
lucked
on.
out.
Thanks for being our absolute first guest on Bootstrap Confidential. I wanted just to kick off with TigerSpike. So I've heard this pretty interesting rumor that TigerSpike was originally founded when you sold a parachute, a little bit random. So can you just kick off with a little bit about founding TigerSpike and how that happened, and a bit about that parachute story?
Yeah, it was sort of literal and metaphorical. So I was a skydiver until I've got three kids, and so I stopped skydiving when I had three kids. But we used to go, actually, when I was in Sydney. I learned in America, but we went to Picton every weekend, and I jumped with some friends while I was at KPMG in Sydney. And so when we started TigerSpike, I overlapped a bit while I was at KPMG. I think I was there for about, maybe it was even 2 years, no, a year. I think it was probably 12 months. And then I finally did quit my job, in which case I ended up foregoing my nice KPMG salary. And then we ran out of money. And the most valuable thing I owned, I think, apart from my guitar, was my parachute. And so I sold it and used the money to open a little office. And so that was, and I was going to buy it back, but I haven't yet. So that was how we started. That was our seed capital. I think it was about 5,000 Aussie dollars at the time.
Fantastic. And when you started, because obviously starting is one of the things that's so confronting when you're bootstrapping. Did you spend much time on business plans or on in-depth Excel spreadsheets and forecasts? Because I know when I started RFI, my first plan lasted about 3 hours, and then they would basically get refreshed on a monthly basis. And it was a good couple of years before we even had quarterly plans that made sense. So what are your thoughts on the amount of time people should spend on that business plan and forecasting and kind of all of that?
Look, I think when you're young and you say, I want to start a business, your dad or someone says, why don't you write a business plan? Just to sort of make sure that you're not having a fleeting thought of, I'm going to go and climb Everest. But we didn't really have one. So we started because I was in a band and we were making ringtones, and a company wanted the ringtones. And then I, started to try and sell them more. And so it was really an opportunity. So my start was an opportunistic one. I always knew I wanted to run a business. And then the opportunity came up, and so I sort of took it. But then once we were going, I think there was a few sort of times where somebody said, you need to write a business plan. And I think there's a place for them. But what I have seen a lot with people who start companies is they sort of tend to write a big, long, sort of 10 plus page, 20-page business plan, which just takes up time, right? I think the most important thing is selling and knowing what customers want and talking to customers. And any time you spend not doing that is a mistake. So I teach a high school class here at Green School. And I just said, we're not doing business plans. We'll do a lean canvas. So just get a lean canvas, fill that out, and that's all you need, honestly. And that's one page. And anything more than that, I would say in the early stages, you're wasting your time. And even I would sometimes say it could even be a mistake, because once you write down a strategy and say, that's what I'm doing, had we done that and stayed in ringtones, we would have died. One of my biggest competitors couldn't get away from ringtone revenues. And we did, and we went into apps. And then when the iPhone launched in 2007, apps became huge. And my whole company was built on all the companies in the world wanting mobile apps. So if we had a rigid strategy saying we're going to do music and ringtones, we would have missed that. So I think it's much more fluid when you're bootstrapping in the beginning. It has to be, right? Because if you're following money, if you raise VC, you can go after a strategy and keep on doing it until it works. But when you're bootstrapping, you're sniffing money here and going, and which you have to, because you need the money. So
Yeah.
I think in particular for bootstrap companies, early stage, I wouldn't have anything more than a lean canvas.
And I think a lot of people do it on a beer coaster, don't they? You hear about it being an idea on a beer coaster or an idea on a napkin at a restaurant. So many of the founders that I've spoken to over the years, it starts with that very, very quite small niche idea. And as you say, it doesn't need to be pages and pages long, because inevitably you're going to have to iterate very shortly as soon as you find the next kind of problem or hurdle or so on. I'm sure, Charles, you've had that experience too.
I think that the beer mat writing down an idea comes from sort of a place of thinking, I used to think of a song, right, in my head, and if I didn't write it down, it was then gone. And I was like, oh wow, it could have been an amazing song. I'm a singer-songwriter, and so I've had a few times. And of course, the songs you don't remember are the ones that were the good ones. But I think that people think if you have an idea, write it down if it's a good one, which I would agree with, right? So journaling and even when you wake up from a dream or whatever, write stuff down. But I think it comes from a place of write it down or you'll forget it, and that's your big idea gone. But I don't think startups are about big ideas. I think they're about sort of smashing and executing well. Because a lot of the time when I speak to founders and they say, oh, I want to start a company, but I haven't had the idea, I sort of say, well, look, most of the big companies you see out there didn't have original ideas. They just executed better. And this is true, especially of the UX space that we're in with Tiger Spike, which is if you can do something more easily for the customer than currently exists, you can win. And so I wouldn't necessarily dwell on an idea. I think that's a mistake. I think what you want to do is find something that's reasonably, a reasonable good idea, which the lean canvas will tell you, right? That has more information on it. And then sort of move into it. But don't wait until you have a good idea, otherwise you'll be waiting until you're really old. And I think the thing that made me sort of start Tiger Spike was I was doing it alongside KPMG, and I was speaking to one of my mum's friends, and she said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm really excited about this Tiger Spike company." And she said, "Yeah, but we spoke 6 months ago, and you're still at KPMG, right? So you haven't really done it. You're not really doing it." And then I thought, God, she's right. I'm not doing it. You know what I mean? And so I think my fear was not doing it, being 60, which at the time I thought was old. I'm now 50 next year. So the fear is that you get to some age like 60 and you think, oh Christ, I've been waiting around for the idea and haven't done anything. So yeah, I don't think you need the beer mat is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you need an idea. And often someone says, I've got this great idea. And it's that classic, solution looking for a problem. Like when I started RFI, I had absolutely no idea what we were going to do. But I just basically took the mantra that like, look at something that people spend money on that their suppliers suck at and work out if you can do it better. And like, back in 2006, it was like, okay, well, can we do it digitally? Whereas now it's like, okay, can you use AI to do it? But there are so many processes out there and things that are done which they're just not done well. They're just, they're clunky, and people have just got lazy, and clients and customers have kind of got lazy. And this is something I know Richard Branson says, just like, look at something where like, the customer service is really bad, the product's really poor, no one's kind of like done anything with it for 20 years, and just go in and do a better, cheaper, faster job and give them a better product at the end of it. And that's really hard to resist, however big and strong you are as an incumbent. If someone's going better, faster, and cheaper than you, they're going to win. So sometimes it's just great execution. It doesn't need to be like a light bulb moment where you are walking down the street and you had this amazing idea, and that's suddenly fantastic, because often the amazing idea is just that. It's no one really cares about it. And that's when you get into problems when you're talking to founders. They've got this amazing idea, and it's like, okay, well, what is that actually going to do, and who is going to really want to buy that? Because otherwise, it's just an amazing idea.
Except for what Groupon was an amazing idea, right?
True.
We made a bit of cash off that. And there are good ones like, the consumer ones. But I think, as you said, Charles, it's looking at somewhere, we just launched this AI company in Melbourne using AI agents to do compliance paperwork for healthcare and aged care. And the systems they're using are still very nascent. You know what I mean? They really don't have a lot of automation at all. And I think banks are a bit like this, and insurance companies certainly are too, where they're filling out forms. And filling out forms is something that AI does extremely well, and reading
Yeah.
forms, reading unstructured data, making sense of it and spitting out structured data. That's many, many people's jobs. And I don't mind if they lose their jobs, because that's the boringest job in the world. And those probably, you're doing them a favor, because then they'll start thinking, what would I really love doing? And maybe I should do that. Because, the sort of the claims people in insurance companies, are not having any fun.
Just because the industry might be quite a staid industry, and just because the product you're looking at might be quite a staid product, that doesn't remove from all the fun that you can have. Taking on the incumbents, building a business, getting a team together, getting a product, expanding it, growing it. That the journey in itself is the fun part. And I think fun's kind of key, because particularly when you're bootstrapping, you and your team are working for generally a lot less than you'll get anywhere else. You're working under a huge amount of pressure. You're constantly like, David tilting at Goliath or charging at windmills. Like, it's full on. And if it's not fun, then it can be hard to motivate yourself sometimes when you're facing what seems like undaunting, or rather, hugely daunting tasks in every single direction. Like it kind of has to be fun.
Yeah, I can certainly attest to that. Just being that wasn't the natural industry for me to go into, banking and market research. My background was performing arts and theatre. It was just so different, but the experience that I had when Charles and I worked together was that it was fun, and it was all these people who'd kind of been cobbled together from all these different parts of the world and had different interests, but still had a good time. On that, Luke, what Charles mentioned at the top of the chat with you about, all the different markets that you entered when you built the company across the world. How did you grow that sort of fun and culture, and people obviously having a fun time working with your business? What did you do when it came to culture? And I know some of the experiences that we've had, but was there anything particular that you did, and any lessons you learned about building culture, especially across different markets, actually? Like, there's a very different fun culture in Sydney than there is in Dubai, maybe, or Singapore.
Yeah, and I would also, just going back to the point that Charles made, sometimes I speak to people who, and a lot of the time I would speak to people who are in disgruntled in corporate jobs, and they were like, oh, well, I'm in equipment finance for GE, and it's so boring, I don't want to do something, I want to do my own company. And then they come up some sort of performing arts company, for example. But what I say to them is, you could be doing a very similar thing to what you're doing now and finding very dull. But if you start a company in it, it becomes a million times more interesting.
Yeah.
So and that's what you know about, right? So if that's really your skill set, I would say the easiest way to do something, if you're sitting in a corporate job, is if you're saying, God, this could be automated, or this, I'm having real problems. Charles, like you said, you saw this real pain point. Starting your own company, doing that. There was a really great case study of this guy who was in HR, which he hated. And then he started his own HR company and built his own HR company the way he wanted it. Doing this sort of same thing he was doing before, but loved it. And so I think if you're in a startup and you're in a kind of, that energy is, you're not working for the man, you're working for a cool startup. So that's the first point. We did a few things at Tiger Spike that I think helped with culture. In the end, we had we had four co-founders. So it was me, Dean Jezard, Oliver Palmer, and Alex Hall. And we were kind of nice guys, you know what I mean? And so we hired people who were a bit like us, and we didn't, we just had a policy of no dicks, and not being a dick, and not taking ourselves too seriously, and sort of, I don't know if it would work these days, but we took the piss out of each other and joked around, and there was it was actually quite male in terms of sort of the camaraderie that we had, and then we were a tech company fundamentally, so in fact we were very skewed male, but in the end we did have some, I think we were probably 30 or 40% women. But that whole culture kind of stayed, and it starts with the top guys. And so sometimes you end up, if you see a company like, take Theranos, for example. I think the two guys, Elizabeth and her partner, at
Stanley.
the top of Theranos, yeah, were just a bit. He especially was a bit of a dick, and that sort of filters down because the people he hires are a bit like him. And generally speaking, when you hire, you tend to hire people like you, and so starting it off well helps.
Yeah.
Um, we had a really great office culture, and so we didn't save money on the offices that we had. So we had really nice sort of old warehouse spaces, real plants, nice layouts. Like we kind of looked a bit like WeWork before WeWork came along, because this was
Yeah.
back then. And we just said, look, offices have to be super nice because people are going to come into them. We want them to stay in them. I'm a big fan of being in the office. The reason I say that is because then you're with cool people in a cool space. And that's kind of, people don't want to go to the office if the office sucks. I think that's the main issue.
Mm.
And we did little funny things like, we bought Friday. We couldn't afford to buy lunch every day for people like Google. So we bought Friday lunches for everyone. We had a personal trainer who came in once or twice a week that all the people could use for free. And so we worked out together. We were generally quite fit as a company. Um, and in fact, in one of the offices in Singapore, we started that whoever did the Friday lunch made lunch for everyone. And then it started to become a competition. And it's sort of,
Oh,
so one of our Italian sort of members of staff made a big Italian meal and had Italian tablecloths and music. And then the Indian guys did an Indian meal that was
oh,
one
that's so
upping the
fun.
Italians. Um, and so that
Yeah.
was, and it was just kind of cool. But yes, the offices were different. I mean, San Francisco was very different from Dubai, for example. And I think you'll see. I mean, our London office were much bigger drinkers than our Dubai or Singapore office. They just were. So you did different things. We never really prescribed one sort of size for the whole company. And because we ran each office as its own P&L with a GM running it, so each GM of an office was like a little entrepreneur running his or her
Mm.
company. And so they would be the sort of, they would set the culture and the pulse of that company. And we would let people, you know, have their own ideas. I mean, fundamentally we were doing sort of tech and design project management. And then each office sort of had their own way of doing project management. And they had, the one in London was called Backbone, and the one in somewhere else was called GT3 or whatever it was. And they all had their own names for it. And I remember with KPMG, they were saying, well, you have to do things this and this and this way. I thought
Mhm.
that kind of sucks. Um, so we just had an environment where we would listen to people and let them be creative and, not take anyone too seriously. We weren't too hierarchical. Everyone could kind of talk to each other. We until we got too big, we used to take them all on a company ski trip when we were in Australia. So, by the time we got to 30 people in Australia, that became expensive because we paid for it all.
Mm.
But bonding things like that. And one thing that actually was quite important that not everyone does necessarily is uh, we found that people become disgruntled and upset not only because of what they're like, but what their spouse is like. Because you go home and you unload all of the, bad things that happened that day to your wife or husband, and then they would be saying, "Oh, this Tiger Spike shit, they're doing all sorts of bad things," and how, and so when employees did well, we rewarded them with a hotel room for the night, right? Which
Right.
they'd take their partner to, or we would have events that the partners came to, and we paid a lot of attention to the partners and families of the staff, because then if they love the company, they'd be, supportive of that worker who often, sometimes would work late and work weekends, and if you don't have a supportive spouse, you're in trouble. So those little things, I think, all added up and helped.
It was so
Um,
interesting what you said then as well about how you let the offices run independently until you became too big. We did exactly the same. We had GMs in Singapore, GMs in the UK, GMs in Toronto, and very much, the way your team wants to celebrate in Singapore is very, very different to the way your team in Sydney wants to celebrate, which is again pretty different to how your team in London wants to celebrate. So it was kind of like, here's your budget, do what works for you. There's a little bit of friendly competition and everything. But then you do get to a certain size where you start being sort of particularly like you, we bootstrapped for 10 years and then got some investment in, and then the investment comes in and it's like, well, it needs to be homogenized, you need global structures, et cetera, et cetera. But just coming back to what you said about like who you employ at the start. So one of the things when you're bootstrapping is you've got such meager trickle of cash as you're starting to sell, which I want to come on to in a second as well. But there's a temptation to go, I need to get really, really great people. And that means I need to get people with lots of experience and people who cost a huge amount of money. And the dangers with that are obviously they cost a huge amount of money. And also those people are fundamentally quite structured in how they're thinking. And as you said at the start, when you're bootstrapping, you want fluidity, you want a lack of structure, and you want to be able to go and like exploring corners where you might not have any skills, where you can just drop someone into the deep end, vertical learning curve, away they go. So you need highly adaptable people. So what did you kind of focus on in those initial years when you're like, yeah, okay, they need to be nice, they need to be smart, but what were you kind of looking at when you were employing talent in the first few years?
Yeah, and the good thing about bootstrapping is you cannot afford the good, the
Yeah,
top guys,
yeah,
right?
exactly. There's no choice in it.
Um, yeah. And look, why did I start Tiger Spike? I my grades were okay, but not amazing. I did computer science in university, so I had some options, but the top guys were getting the jobs at Goldman's and McKinsey's, and I didn't get into those, right? I got into KPMG, still a pretty good job. I was a consultant, but often it's the guys who don't get the top grades and then they want to prove themselves a little bit. So that was kind of who we hired. We had this thing that we called local boy done good, right? But perhaps it was the guy who didn't go to the best uni, but there were guys and gals who knew that they were able to kick ass but weren't given the opportunity, or were stuck in some corporate job where they weren't listened to. They didn't progress because they didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge, or they were a woman, or there was some reason that they felt they were being held back. And so what I find about startups and the people we hired is, hey, this is your chance to prove yourself. And there's nowhere to hide. There's lots of things you need to do. If something goes wrong, you've got to fix it. Um, there's not a lot of money, but none of us want a lot of money, so we did have a share option pool, which was good and bad in the end. But I think it's those sort of scrappy guys. And I remember talking to this German guy who built a company from nothing, bootstrapped, and then sold it for I think 2 or 3 billion. And at one point, when he got his big round in, he brought in a number two from McKinsey, and that guy from McKinsey hired all of his ex-McKinsey people. And at the end of his talk, I said, who was better, the homegrown talent or McKinsey guys? And he said, without exception, it was the homegrown guys. And I know McKinsey well, and we worked with them a lot, and they're very, very smart guys, and I've seen them execute extremely well, but you can't afford them in those situations. And McKinsey people are used to dealing with extremely intelligent people. And so we had one lady from Princeton who came into our New York office. And after a week, I went up to her and said, you've been sitting at your desk for a week behind these spreadsheets and you haven't spoken to many of the people or any of our customers. And she goes, I can't deal with this. Your guys are, not the top tier guys. And I was sort of, the answer was she was not really cut out for startups.
Yeah.
And so, similarly with MBAs, sometimes an MBA gives you a sort of a bit of a false confidence that, that you tend to apply all these sort of theories that you hear in classrooms. And I remember one of our officers was really suffering, and I went up to one of the low level dev guys, and I was like, how do you feel it's going? And he said, we've got so many of these plans. We've got the 369 plan, the 420 plan, the 360 ding dang dong, and the blah blah blah. And it's like, I just want to do the work. And people forget that companies is selling things and delivering those things, right? That's really all it is. Can you, get a customer to buy something, and then when he buys it, is that a nice experience? And are you giving him something of value that in our case, we had to build some of it. And you don't need to complicate things. And people, I found, the nice thing about having 8 offices all operating independently is you could sort of see little experiments, which ones were doing well, which ones were easier to open, and how did people feel in the offices? Were they motivated in one and not the other? And generally speaking, the busiest offices were the happiest, right? It didn't matter about the Friday lunches and stuff and the hammocks and all that stuff. I mean, that was stuff we did anyway. But if you are busy doing hard, important work, and a lot of our work was, we did work for DBS in Singapore, and all of our sort of designs were on the ATM. So every time ATM and get money, that's all of our designs. And so it's kind of nice to see that, right? Or if you're booking a flight on Emirates, there we were. Reading The Economist, that was us. And so people were proud of that work. And we did some great work with the UN, where we put a load of tech in so that you could, when there was a food shortage somewhere, we could optimize the way that food comes from where the food is being stored into that place. And so you can talk to your parents about that. You feel you're doing important work. It's hard work. It's difficult problems to solve. And I think that's really all there is to it. And I see a lot of younger folk these days talking about, can I have work-life balance and so on, and saying what they think will make them happier in the job. But a lot of the time I'm saying, look, you're going to be happy if you're doing really important work
Mhm.
that people say well done for, and it's hard work, and you're solving difficult problems, and you'll be working hard, and you'll be working weekends sometimes. And it's don't focus on whether you're going to have, you know, 4-day weeks or Friday lunches. Sort of think about what is the work that you're doing and who are the people you're doing it for. Is it doing hard work with a good team? You know, little team of pirates is wonderful.
In the startup land and you're bootstrapping, I mean, you're not going to be doing the sort of 4-day weeks, are you? I love the no dicks policy. I think that's a fabulous. Uh, my
I
husband's
didn't.
Canadian, and his favorite phrase, and this was said at our wedding, is "Don't be an asshole." That's his catchphrase of life. And I like he's really going to resonate with your no dicks policy. Did you have? I mean, did you ever have situations where you had some dicks come into the business and you had to exit them? What was that like? How did you kind of overcome those sorts of challenges? And did you sort of identify it pretty quickly? It sounds like it becomes apparent quite quickly.
It's yeah. I mean, it's sort of the way it's set up deals with it. I mean, I remember that one of the proudest moments was when I went to the London office. This is when we had 100 and something people in. There was some dude who I hadn't met, and he was an old guy. Like I think he was in his 50s, and the average age of the company at the time was probably, 30, early 30s. And so he said, Luke, this is the first company I've been to, and I've been to 3 different. We used to move people around a lot too, right? So we used to take Aussies and send them to America. Americans came to what there's an E3 visa you can get between Australia and America that's wonderful, very easy to
Yeah,
get.
we used to do the same
And they
thing.
love that. Yeah. As soon as you get some Aussie into New York, they love you, right? And they're loving it because they're having a great experience. And this guy who had been to 3 offices said, I've never been to a company where I've not met one dick. And I think that happens because if you have a critical mass of guys and girls who don't tolerate dicks,
Mm.
you can't really exist there if you are one. You know what I mean? You can't get along if you enter a group. And I in a way, I think this is where you see everyone sort of getting upset a little bit with Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk about sort of this disinformation and community policing. But I think actually the community does rather a good job of collectively policing people, because I don't think in general in a public face, even if it's on the internet, that the majority are dicks. And I think sometimes if someone comes in and starts acting like a real asshole, he'll get called out and sort of pushed out. Now that might not necessarily be true in internet. Having said that, but it certainly was if you're face to face in person in a company, and there's no tolerance for, you know, and I'm not just saying like being a really sort of aggressive, obvious dick, but I'm sort of, if someone is very top down or sort of a bit micromanagey, and
It
that's
was always
just not how
blame
we
for
do.
us. Like blame was always the flag for us. Like when you've got a fast growing bootstrap business, it can only work if you've got to accept mistakes are going to happen. And when mistakes happen, you fix the mistakes and you don't have some kind of kangaroo court of whose fault was that? Why did that happen? And let's blame this person. And one of the things that
Yep.
we realized as we grew that all the homegrown talent knew not to blame people. Just fix it, learn the lesson and move on. And one of the things that we found out as we were growing was you bring in these people with experience who've got 10, 15, 20 years experience in different backgrounds, and some of them can adjust quite quickly to that, but others can't. And because things go wrong all the time when you're growing quickly, when something went wrong, the first flag for us would be they'd go, this has gone wrong and it's this person's fault. And you're like, I don't care whose fault it is. That's not the issue
Mm.
here. Of course, things are going to go wrong. People are working long hours, they're exhausted, they're not getting any guidance. They're on vertical learning curves. We're trying new things. Things will go wrong. And when they do, you can't just have a blame court. You've just got to fix it and move on and lessons learned. And all the people that kind of like would hit the kind of like what we used to call, the toxic ones would be so busy trying to protect their back and blame everyone else around them and not actually fix the problem so we can carry on growing. That was always the kind of
Mm.
first flag for us. And in fairness, it wasn't the first flag, it was the only flag. The second someone did that, it was like, okay, you've done it once. We know from experience you're not going to change. We got to you got to go now. And that was one of the key differences between what you refer to as the homegrown talent and some of the really, really bright and experienced people that you bring in. It's just that kind of blame-free culture and the ability
Mm.
to kind of like just move past that and just fix things, carry on growing, carry on learning, carry on developing. So that was one of the big things for us.
It's good to hear you say that, actually, and I'm gonna think about that some more, because and one thing you said that's true is once you saw that flag, that was it. And what
Yeah.
we found as well was that whenever we did have to let someone go, it was always the case that we looked back and thought, we did have a few flags. And so one of the guys, Alex Burke, who ran our Sydney office and later was the CEO of the group, his sort of thing was, as soon as you get a doubt, get them out. Like,
Yeah.
there's no point doing a PEP. There's no point managing, and that's what I love about
Get a
America.
doubt, get them
You can
out.
do
There's
that.
your catchphrase.
Well,
Yeah.
well, yeah, and they probably have a place that they'll fit somewhere better. But like for RFI, if there was a blame thing and that was a flag, then you don't wait, because and it's important, because if you get somebody bad in the company, it can kind of ruin everyone in a way.
Yeah, it's
And it
amazing
is
how
sometimes
quickly
just a
how
bit.
toxicity, particularly in small startup environments,
Oh,
where
yeah.
people are really going on the culture, the fun, working the longer hours, earning less money. Toxicity, it's not like a corporate job where you're getting a high salary and you just have to learn how to put up with it and play politics. Toxicity just spreads so quickly, and it starts killing the product, it starts killing the client experience, it starts affecting your revenue. You just have to.
Everything.
We used to call it the Lion King syndrome, after Scar in the Lion King, which was really popular with because the average age of most of our employees was in their mid-20s, and they'd all grown up watching that. But the second you had a Scar situation, you just had to remove them, and pretty quickly, within 24, 48 hours, just removing them, the toxicity would disappear, the product would improve, the experience would improve, the revenue would start coming back. It was phenomenal how quickly you could turn it around, but you do
And
need to
here's
keep an eye out on it.
And here's a trick that's controversial and people don't like it. And I post about it sometimes. The way you can ensure that you have good culture is pay someone 20% less than they would get elsewhere. Because if you do that, they'll definitely go get another job if they're, once they rattle around and they realize people don't like them because they're dicks, they will go and get another job.
Yeah.
If you pay people too much, they stick in the job. And I know that people are like, well, Luke, you're a total asshole. You should pay people. If you value them, you should pay them. We did that with sort of performance-related bonuses and profit share, and ultimately the sale. But I think if you're paying people slightly less and they're there because of the culture, right? The only reason they're taking the salary cut is because they like the culture. And if you don't have a good culture, you just cannot do that, because you have to pay people to stay there because they don't like it. So if you're not able to pay people less than market rates, you haven't got a good culture.
Yeah, I know.
That's not going to be popular. Maybe cut that bit. Cut that bit. It's not going to be popular.
No, I like that bit.
No, I think it's
That's
fantastic. I
good.
mean, you can't pay people normal salaries, so you have to find people. You have to find
Yes,
people
you're
that are
not
willing
able
to
to.
work for less, and that means you can't get experienced people. So you either have to get people who really buy into the idea, or you have to get people who, as you say, have been ignored in their careers up until now for a variety of reasons. Like, we had a 50-50 gender equality policy. And we got lots of really, really top female talent, because they were like, I'm really bored where I am, but if you got a 50-50, if I'm going to earn and be heard and be listened to in an environment in the same way that in an equal way, then hey, I'll take a massive cut to come and work there, because that just sounds more fun. So you either get them, or you just get people who have, as you say, they it's their second chance. They've not gone to go to a great university. They've not got a great degree. They've not even got a degree. They just, or they're just young and they just wanted to give it a go. And when those people start getting great career growth, then the whole culture becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's like fast growth. If you get fast growth and people come into a fast growth environment, then it's by definition, it's exciting. The challenges are there, the pressure's there, but you're winning all the time. And if you're constantly hitting your metrics like you were and like we were at RFI, then that in itself becomes like a really cool story that people start going, you know what? I'll take a little bit of a salary cut because they look like they're having so much fun over there. And I'm really, really bored here. And that just looks like so much fun. And getting up every morning and going having a huge amount of fun um, is a really appealing thing of whatever age you are.
Can I just say, as a woman who's experienced that, also being at a table, at a boardroom table with an equal number of women and men is extremely enjoyable. You've got your numbers there, you've got your sort of sisterhood, and then the guys are there as well. That's
Yeah.
just the way the world is. And to be at the table, because often if you're up at that board level, I actually sit on another board where, it's a lot of guys and there's 2 women and I'm one of them. But I do like the boards and the leadership of a company when you're at the table, and we, Charles and I experience this when there's, 5 guys and 5 girls, and we're all going to think differently and provide different insight. But, you know, not safety in numbers. I don't want to say that, but, you know, it's just nice to have, you know, fellow women alongside you in those leadership roles for sure.
Yeah, totally. 100%.
Just one final question before we finish up. I was talking about the fast growth at RFI, and we just had two metrics for our first 10 years, 50% year-on-year growth and 98% renewal rate. And those metrics ruled everything, and that's what we were focused on, and that helped drive our performance. What are your views on getting a really couple of simple metrics and trying to just use those to drive and fuel your bootstrap growth as you kind of like grow and expand?
So generally speaking, I like fewer. I'm sitting on some boards where they have too many, and I think if you have too many, you don't really focus on one. I think Elon Musk's metric was how cheaply he can get cargo into space. You know, the whatever the ton price, and that's what he was obsessive about. We were quite obsessive about revenue per employee. The nice thing about revenue per employee, it means you keep your employee costs down, and you're trying to get as much revenue as you can, of course, but that lets you benchmark against other companies. And generally speaking, if you're a services company, you're somewhere between 80,000 and 150,000. And if you're a product company, you're even, you're higher. So you can kind of see how you're doing. If I meet a company and they say we're a SaaS company, and I find out what their revenues are and divide by their employees, and if that's sort of less than 100K, I'm sort of putting them in a services company bucket. And so I think that revenue per employee was one. Revenue growth is another, right? So how much, especially if you're trying to sort of get noticed and raise money and sell. And we did that with the Deloitte Fast 50. So Deloitte Fast 50 is 3 years of consecutive revenue growth, and they saw who had the highest percentage. We were at one point in number 3 in Australia, and I think we were in there for 8 years in a row. Us and Atlassian were in there for 8 years in a row. Although they did
beat us. We were 6 years in a row in the BRW Fast 100. That was our one, like the Australian BRW Fast 100. I think we were the first to be 6 years in a row in that. We always kind of hovered around the 50 mark.
And that's not easy, right? Because once you get more years under your belt, it's harder and harder to stay in there. So that was quite cool. And I had a friend who ran a company, and he was fast growth too. Ian Gardner, his name was, and we were sort of neck and neck. And if I beat him, he'd buy me a crate of beer, and if he beat me, I'd buy him a crate of beer or whatever it was. He was a cool dude. I'm still friends with him to this day. But that was, that for me was revenue growth was important. But it was kind of nice because when the list came out, we could see how we were doing, and then we'd celebrate it, and then have an award ceremony and so on and so forth. So I think, I would have one key metric. For us, it was revenue per employee. Then I'd have 3 below that, one of which is revenue percentage growth. And, if you're in the SaaS business, it's churn. But it depends on what your business is. But I would say don't have one main one and then have 3 below that. Then your accountant, when you see him every quarter, you can go through the next 10, to sort of fine tune things. But I think it's fewer. There should be 2 to 5 that the whole company looks at, or one that the whole company looks at, but then 2 or 5 below that everyone knows and follows. So that's how we would kind of do it, because data. I mean, that and then you could sort of see office per office. And when I would talk to the GMs of one of the offices, and they said, "Oh, we're having it's not possible to do X, Y, Z," I'd say, "Well, San Francisco's doing it, so why can't you do it?" You know what I mean? And you'd be able to sort of to use that data to benchmark and to sort of have them compete with each other a little bit and so on. So few is less is more for me in metrics.
That's fantastic. I know Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, once said that starting a business is like jumping off a cliff without a parachute and building an aeroplane on the way down. And I think, Luke, you possibly came the closest to that. I love that story. The man who sold a parachute for 5K to bootstrap a business to an 88 million exit. That's a fantastic story. And thank you very much for your time and for joining us and for sharing those lessons with us. For all our podcast listeners, if you'd like to hear more podcasts on how to bootstrap, or you want to access all our bootstrapping resources and playbooks, then just go to our website, www.bootstrapconfidential.com, for free registration. And to all those bootstrappers out there, if you have a question for us or for Luke, or just want some advice from our really experienced bootstrap partners, then just register for free on the site and post in the chat, or message us on LinkedIn or X, or just DM me. So thank you very much for your time, Luke. Thanks for joining us, and thanks very much to everybody for listening. Thanks.